Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gabesty here. Today I'm doing another monk solo guide. This one is for Maloriak in Blackwing Descent on 10-man. And the first thing you should know is that this fight is very easy. I really don't even know why I'm doing a guide. It's just super trivial. You shouldn't have any trouble getting this down solo. So don't even worry about it. You can probably just turn this off right now because there's really no issue at all. It took me like one try maybe at most. So yeah, I'm pretty awesome.
Lol.
Oh, that's not nice. I might have had a stroke there for a moment. What I meant to say is this fight is ridiculous, and I can't even begin to describe, even though I will try, all the crazy crap that you have to deal with to solo this as a monk. Pretty much everything that could go wrong for your class will go wrong in terms of planning for this and dealing with the mechanics. So buckle in, because it's going to take a couple tries. It certainly did for me. So I'm obviously brewmaster. I'm using 504 eye level gear for this video, and you can see my talent spec here. So there are many talents that you absolutely need and some that don't matter. The one thing you need for sure is Zen Sphere. You also need Dampen Harm or Diffuse Magic, but Dampen Harm is better in every way, so get that one. And you'll also want your Tiger Pet. It's not necessary, but it's the best DPS option for this fight. Other than this, for glyphs, you're going to want Spinning Crane Kick, so you can use that and move at full speed. You'll want Fortifying Brew for the reduction in damage, and you'll want something besides Breath of Fire, which is a standard tank glyph pretty much. The reason you don't want that one is because you actually don't want to disorient the minions when you use Breath of Fire on them. You want them to attack you. So yeah, try using something else. I use Death Touch glyph just because you can throw out a Death Touch once or maybe twice, but probably not. But at least once for no chi cost and take care of one of the minions right away. All right, let's rewind and we'll get started with the actual guide because it's going to be a long one. So the first problem that you'll run into as a monk for this fight is the ability Remedy. So this is a self-heal that lasts 10 seconds. It's a magic debuff that Maloriak casts on himself. And it heals for 25,000 every tick, or every second, and increases by 25,000 every time it hits. So first tick is 25, and then 50, then 75, and so on. So the maximum that it ends up healing Maloriak over the 10 seconds is 1.375 million health. Now the problem is, obviously, monks don't have a way to purge magic effects on their target. So you have to DPS through this heal, and that's a lot of healing to get through, in addition to just doing the normal DPS you need to do. So we can actually figure out pretty easily, if you look at the top here, the base hit points divided by the Berserk timer, which is 7 minutes, equals the base DPS that you'd have to do if Remedy wasn't an issue. You could just dispel it, like some other classes are able to do. So 19.8 million health for Maloriak over 420 seconds. So that's a base DPS of 47,000. So if you were able to ignore everything else, you'd have a very easy goal of 47,000 DPS just on Maloriak to beat the Berserk. But of course, when you add in Remedy, this becomes a lot more difficult. So now we have the Remedy heal, so 1.375, multiplied by the remedies per minute, which is 1.5 remedies are cast per minute on average, times the Berserk time, plus the base health, and then divide that by the Berserk time as well. So this actually comes out to about 81,500 DPS to meet the Berserk time, with dealing with the remedy healing as well. So 81,500 DPS on Maloriak for this fight is a very high number, and if I had to guess, I would say that brewmaster tank is probably going to be incapable of meeting that DPS requirement in this tier of gear. I would guess you're going to have to wait until you can upgrade your current gear with Valor for extra eye levels in 5.3, and then maybe we'll see those kind of numbers. And the reason I say that is because while it doesn't sound like very much, you have to consider the mechanics that also occur during the fight. So you're not just fighting Maloriak straight up and that's it. You have to deal with various abilities that will hinder your DPS, as well as the minions that spawn. You have to deal with those, because while they're active and near Maloriak, they will reduce the damage that he takes by 20% for each minion that's near him. So this stacks up. So in addition to killing them, obviously this lowers your DPS on Maloriak. It also lowers the straight DPS from the debuff. So looking at the log for this kill, and I assure you I've got so much practice after 240 attempts that I'm pretty much optimized as much as I can for maximizing my DPS with my gear. I was able to do only about 54,000 DPS over the 7 minutes of the fight before Berserk starts, compared to the 85,000. So that's obviously 30,000 less than is technically required to beat the Berserk. And that's why this strategy does not revolve around beating the Berserk, as stupid as that sounds. So, long story short is, without a way to get rid of Remedy, brewmasters have a very difficult time with this. If you're a Death Knight tank, this fight is trivial. You just glyph to purge magic effects, and you have to do 45,000 DPS to them. It's not that difficult to do. So, yeah, this is going to be a bitch and a half to get this requirement down. So the next ability that screws you over quite a bit is Flash Freeze. And this is cast once per blue vial phase. It is usually cast around the same period, but the timing is not always exact. And this is true for all of the abilities for Maloriak. He sort of has a series of cooldowns he can use for his various abilities. And this means that sometimes things line up differently from one attempt to the next. But there is a minimum cooldown time for which he will use Flash Freeze. So the way I kept track of when this was coming is figured out what that minimum was, which turns out to be about 45 seconds after he starts the blue vial phase. So after he throws the blue vial and you get the chat message. That's about the earliest that he can cast Flash Freeze if you never interrupt any of his spells during the phase. And this is very important. It's kind of a tactic that you're going to want to use throughout most of the fight, except the very end, is never interrupt either of his casts, either his Arcane Storm or his Minion Summon. Because if you interrupt, it will basically trigger his script to then check if another ability is off cooldown, and if it is, he may cast something else more frequently than he would otherwise. So you want to allow him to channel as much as possible, and you can do this by letting him cast things without interrupting. It's also beneficial because you want the ads to come out early and kill them off as quickly as you can while also building your vengeance. So in any event, if you never interrupt during the blue vial phase, Flash Freeze will always come about 45 seconds in. It will be at most that early, and often it's delayed a few seconds after that. Usually what ends up happening, and you'll see it in these clips that I'm showing over and over, is that when the 45-second timer expires, and I have a week or a bar in the top left there that helps me remind me, so I'll try to include that in the description. So when that's about to end, he's usually going to start channeling Arcane Storm around that time. If he does this, that means that Flash Freeze will follow that Arcane Storm's completion very shortly. So there you can see he completed it, and then I was frozen a couple seconds later. So basically what I do is, if the Flash Freeze timer is ending, that 45-second timer, and he's not casting an Arcane Storm, then I assume that he's going to skip it and freeze me right away. But if he is casting an Arcane Storm as the timer is ending, then I know that the freeze will come right after that follow-up Arcane Storm. Now to handle the freeze, you only have one ability that you can use reliably to handle this, at least that I could figure out, and that is Zen Sphere. And it's really unfortunate in a fight where DPS and healing are so vital that you have to use this terrible, terrible talent. But that's the only way I figured out to actually be able to do reliable DPS to yourself, because you have to kill the freeze that's applied to you. It's a attackable object or NPC. It has very low health, around 10,000 or so. So 2 ticks from your Zen Sphere will kill it. So this basically means as long as you have 4 or maybe even 3 seconds remaining on your Zen Sphere when you become frozen, you will be able to break it with the Zen Sphere ticks. They'll just AE something around you, and since the flash freeze object is the nearest thing to your player character, since it's right on your location, it will get hit by the AE damage and be broken. You can also break it instantly in 1 tick if that tick happens to be the expiration of your Zen Sphere. So if the timing is working out just right, Zen Sphere will expire just the moment after the freeze is applied to you, and it will do more damage than the actual ice block has, and it will kill it in 1 shot. But the timing on that is way too unknown to rely on. So instead you should just put up your Zen Sphere a few seconds before you know that the freeze is off cooldown, and that way the 15-second duration of Zen Sphere will be sure to be active over the course of the lifespan of that freeze. And then you'll break yourself out in 2 ticks, and then you can proceed with the fight. Now, one thing you have to be very careful of is your health level when you are preparing to Zen Sphere yourself to break your freeze. If you're below 35%, Zen Sphere will instantly detonate, doing the AE effect, and expire. So you won't have any Zen Sphere active, you'll be frozen, and your Zen Sphere will be off cooldown, so you can't cast it again right away. And since you're going to be frozen for 30 seconds, if you don't actually break it, most of the time you're going to die outright. And even if you don't die outright from that and you do recover after the 30-second freeze, which is possible, just not likely, you'll lose so much DPS time during those 30 seconds that it's almost not worth trying anyway to continue the fight. So timing is everything on this Zen Sphere to break this freeze. Like I said, just try to get a timer of some sort. You can use the weak order I provide or whatever it is, but something that tells you this is when the flash freeze is possible, and then watch for that arcane storm that should come around that time. If it's not being cast and your flash freeze timer is ending, you should Zen Sphere yourself. This also means that you shouldn't ideally chain cast Zen Sphere right before this moment. You don't want to be in a weird situation where Zen Sphere is not quite off cooldown, you can't recast it, but you have one active on you that is going to expire before the freeze actually hits, because it takes a few seconds for that freeze to actually appear and be attackable. So don't be afraid to sort of save your Zen Sphere a few seconds prior to this moment, just so you're prepared. And otherwise, make sure you're healed enough so that you're not going to be in danger of dropping below 35% when you cast that Zen Sphere in the first place. It's really a pain, and it's really unfortunate that you have to lose the much higher healing, primarily, as well as DPS of Chi Wave in favor of the Zen Sphere, just to get rid of this ability. Now, the next ability that you have to worry about is a combination of Scorching, Blast, and Consuming Flame. And of course, these are both cast during the red vial phase. So Consuming Flames is a 10-second debuff applied to you. And while it's active, it does very minor damage every second, about 4,500 fire damage. However, any additional magic damage you take while the debuff is active will increase the dot damage from Consuming Flames by 50% of the damage you took from another source. So if you take a tick of storm damage for 7,000, for example, then you would actually gain 50% of that damage, or 3,500 extra, on all subsequent ticks of Consuming Flames for its 10-second duration. So if you take a tick of storm and you have 9 seconds left, That's 9 ticks of 3,500 extra damage from that first storm tick. And of course, storm's usually going to be ticking over and over, so this damage will ramp up. Every tick will add another 50% of whatever that damage was onto the existing consuming flame dot. Now for storm itself, this is not all that dangerous. It's not dangerous enough to actually interrupt the storm. I talked about why you shouldn't interrupt anything during most of the fight previously. So still just let that cast and heal through the damage. However, where things become problematic is the consuming flames in combination with Scorching Blast. So Scorching Blast does 400,000 fire damage, and this is cast usually 2 times every red vial phase. It can cast 3 times if you're really unlucky, so just know it's possible, but most of the time you'll get it twice during the red vial phase. And this is the primary reason that we're using Dampen Harm as our level 75 talent. You obviously can use Diffuse Magic to completely negate one of these hits, but since it only lasts 6 seconds, you only get to negate one of them per phase, whereas Dampen Harm, you can reduce all 3 casts if you actually get all 3 by the 50% marker, since nothing else will do that much damage to you. So Dampen Harm is the way to go. And because of that, and the timing of the red vial phase, you should actually use Dampen Harm just a couple seconds after the red vial phase begins. And this will ensure that the 45-second duration is active throughout the entire red vial phase, so it covers all the Scorching Blasts. But then you get it on going on cooldown as soon as possible as well, so you can use it later on in the fight if you need to. So anyway, as I said, if Consuming Flames is active and you get hit with Scorching Blast, even with Dampen Harm, that's a 200,000 K hit. And that means 50% of that damage is applied to the 1 second dot tick of Consuming Flames. So you're going to then take 100,000 damage extra every tick. And that's ridiculous. It's way too much damage. So the way to counteract this is to utilize Guard. If you completely absorb the damage from the Scorching Blast attack, then it's not applied to the Consuming Flames debuff because you didn't technically take the damage. It's only damage that actually does damage to you. That's an oxymoron. But anyway, if you guard the entire hit of Scorching Blast, even if you have Consuming Flames active, it won't add any extra damage to it. So the best way to do this that I found is to generally guard the first Scorching Blast that occurs. And this always seems to happen similar to the freeze in the blue phase around the same time period as after the red phase. So here I'll walk through the timing of that first Scorching Blast. So as the red phase begins, I'm just keeping my DPS rotation going, healing myself up, and I'll usually get a Consuming Flames early on, and then there'll be a storm, and it's shortly after this storm that he'll usually cast Remedy on himself and then immediately blast you. So there's the Remedy and there's the blast right after. This is not always the case, but 90, maybe even 95% of the time, this is the pattern. So I basically guard myself just at the start of that Arcane Storm or just at the end of it. It doesn't really matter which, but obviously the closer to the end of the storm, the more absorb you'll have remaining on it. But the point is just to absorb most, if not all, of that Scorching Blast hit, and then any active Consuming Flames will not get a very big increase. Because if you take that full hit, even with Dampen Harm, you're going to take a ton of dot damage, and you'll have to use some sort of cooldown to even come close to surviving. And since Guard will be down for second and possibly third Scorching Blast, you just have to rely on heals for those. There's not much else you can do. So the best thing I found is to take full advantage of your Expel Harm when you get low. Obviously it has no cooldown there. Make sure you use your heal from Zen Sphere, weaken it as it is, and then move around a lot to pick up the healing orbs that are on the ground, because they will sort of stack up a lot if you're not paying attention, so you can get quite a bit of healing. Otherwise, try to use your Guard twice during the red phase if possible, making sure to to cover that first Scorching Blast. And then if you have nothing else, you can use Fortifying Brew. But you cannot use Fortifying Brew if the Berserk time is less than 3 minutes away. So this means basically the first or the second round of phases during that red vial you can use it, but after that you probably can't. Alright, so the next thing is to just consider some general tips for dealing with the aberrations. So there will be 18 in total, I believe, throughout the fight. And as I mentioned before, you never want to interrupt the casts of Maloriak until after the Berserk time. So this allows the adds to come out as quickly as possible and getting your DPS higher through Vengeance from taking more damage, as well as just dealing with the adds faster so that you can focus more on Maloriak, basically. To that end, you can kind of tell how well you're doing this based on the health of Maloriak around the time you finish the last set of aberrations. So generally the timing will be about the same, although your DPS will vary from attempt to attempt based on Vengeance, specifically how many red vial phases you get versus how many blue vial phases you get before the adds die. Since red vial will do a lot more damage to you, of course. But it's still a good overall measure. So when you finish the last set of aberrations, you can look at Maloriak's health and say, all right, this is ahead of schedule, or this is way behind. I know my DPS is not very good. I have to make it up later, that kind of thing. So for me, I tried to aim for 75 to 80% health on Maloriak when that last aberration set was dead. And if I was doing that, then I had a good chance of pushing Maloriak to the main goal, which was below 50% around the time Berserk hit. And we'll get into more of that later. So a few tips I found for dealing with aberrations efficiently. The main thing is that you want to kill them quickly when they're active, because when they're within range of Maloriak, they're going to reduce the damage he takes by 20% for each aberration that's near him. So you can't simply just ignore him or ignore the aberrations and DPS Maloriak like normal. He will not take very much damage at all, and you'll be wasting your time. So the name of the game is to kill the aberrations very quickly, but do so efficiently so that you're not wasting, any time that you can otherwise be spending on Maloriak by himself. So the first thing is to make sure you maintain your Tiger Power just before a set of aberrations are coming out. So refresh it. I'll give you the 20 seconds, and then you can not have to worry about that while you're AEing and doing your primary AE attacks to kill them. The next thing is don't wait for Keg Smash to use it on the aberrations unless the timing naturally lines up. So right there is a good example. Even though that aberration was only a second or so away, I don't want to wait and use Keg Smash when they get there unless it just happens to be available. Because then you're just wasting your biggest DPS move on Maloriak. And since he doesn't have any debuffs yet, since the aberrations weren't in range at that moment, there's really no reason to delay. So other than that, the next best thing is to make sure you have low chi when a group of aberrations are coming in. If you have max chi and a group comes in, you're going to waste a resource of some kind. So you'll basically be spinning crane kicking or something like that, building chi that is actually wasted. You don't actually gain it. So in addition to doing your Tiger Power, make sure you dump most, if not all, your chi before the group comes in. So right there, I made sure that I had one chi, it looked like there. I couldn't get rid of that one, but that's fine. So that allows me to be certain that I can do 3 spinning crane kicks, or maybe 4, or 2 spinning crane kicks and a Keg Smash, and then be concerned about spending my chi more efficiently. And then the final thing is opposite of that. While you want to make sure your chi is all spent before the aberrations get in range of you, you want to have high energy. Because if you have really low energy and the aberrations are incoming, you're not going to be able to do much to them. You want to be able to spinning crane kick or Keg Smash if it's off cooldown right away. You don't want to have to delay, because again, if you're delaying any extra time than necessary, that DPS on Maloriak is just going to tank for that period while he's got those extra buffs. So try to keep your energy high without capping it out, of course. Your Cake Smash off cooldown, and your chi very low. And then if you do all those things, then you can use Spinning Crane Kick as your primary DPS, along with Cake Smash and Breath of Fire as your secondary moves. So you don't want to spam Breath of Fire necessarily, but if you're going to cap out on chi, then you do want to do that. The exception is if you have Cake Smash hit all the aberrations first, then you want a Breath of Fire right away so that you get that dot ticking on them without having to wait for that. And then you can Spinning Crane Kick afterwards. The final minor tip is not all that helpful, but it will help you in a pinch. Is that, remember, if you use the glyph for Death Touch, then you can get a free Death Touch, or Touch of Death rather, on the aberrations. So you'll probably only get to cast it once during the whole fight because the cooldown is so long with that glyph. But if you use it on a full health aberration, that's obviously a lot of damage reduction that you're removing from Maloriak by taking away one of the 20% buffs. And then you can immediately start your AE rotation, and because you'll still have 3 targets for Spinning Crane Kick, you'll still gain chi just like normal. So you shouldn't really lose DPS in that scenario. Alright, so finally we come to the bizarre, or more bizarre aspect of this entire strategy. And that's the notion that because of the DPS requirement and the heal that we can't get rid of as a monk, the only way I found to actually have any chance at killing Maloriak was to wait for Berserk and then pray to all the gods that you can live and kill him. So it's really a stupid strategy, I fully admit, and I expect approximately 0% of anybody watching this to try it, because as you saw at the beginning, 240 odd attempts does not an easy fight make. So obviously this is not the intended way to do this. Of course, neither is soloing for that matter, but it's what's available to monks at this present time. As I said, at some point gear levels will reach enough that you'll be able to do enough straight DPS, ignoring the heal, and just kill him before the Berserk anyway. But in the case of my gear setup, this was the only viable option, and calling it viable is somewhat unfair anyway. I think even in this tier, if you had 520, 525, 530 eye level gear, you'd still probably hit Berserk for sure, but the amount of time you'd have to spend in that Berserk is much lower, and your survival would be quite a bit higher too. So this would not be nearly as difficult as it seems, based on the footage you see here. So part of dealing with Berserk is really preparation for it, pretty much. So, a lot of it and almost all of it is going to come down to just RNG, how lucky you get with your dodges and your parries. But there are things you can do to help yourself, of course. So the first thing is just preparation for entering the phase. This includes, maintaining your DPS throughout so that his health is as low as possible without being too low. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And beyond that, then preparing all your cooldowns so you have as much as possible to increase your survival when you go into the phase. So this means having 15 stacks of Elusive Brew available if possible. What I ended up doing is actually never using Elusive Brew in the final blue/red vial phases. I just completely neglected, or stopped using it on purpose so that it would be almost certain to have 15 stacks available. Depending on your stats of your gear, of course, this is not always the case, but usually you'll maintain that 15 stack. The other thing is you definitely need Fortifying Brew for Berserk. So again, make sure if you use it early in the fight that you're not using it when there's under 3 minutes left on the Berserk time, because you have to have that available for this. Of course, other things that help will be Dampen Harm, if that's up. It's not required, and if you had a red vial phase as your last phase before Berserk, it won't be up until late into the Berserk. But if you had red vial phase first in the last round, then it will be available. And beyond that, you need a potion cooldown, of course. So you'll want to pre-pot when you pull the fight, but then save your potion till the end, and your tiger pet as well. So pretty much everything you have available that's a cooldown should ideally be up. If you can afford it, you also want to save guard. Guard is a great tool for after you take some initial damage during Berserk, which are going to be huge spike hits. This is a good emergency tool to buy yourself some time to heal up for at least another round of attacks. And it won't save you for very long, but because your vengeance is going to be out of control, you can often get a guard that's 600, 700, 800,000 absorb. So that can save you from easily a series of 4 attacks, perhaps, if they all connect. So as you get knocked back for the final green phase before Berserk, you'll want to watch the timer closely. Now sometimes he will cast a Arcane Storm before the Berserk actually hits, in which case I let the Arcane Storm channel because this just gives me a little bit of extra DPS time to DPS him while he has the green debuff. However, if he casts Berserk before the Arcane Storm, which he did in this particular fight here, this clip, then you have to immediately interrupt the Arcane Storm at the same time you start your cooldowns. If you don't interrupt the Arcane Storm, it's going to tick for 100,000 every second and just destroy you. So you have to interrupt right away. The other thing is, as soon as Berserk does start, blow both Fortifying Brew and Elusive Brew. Now, if you have really good gear, you may be able to get away with only using Elusive Brew, but I don't recommend it. But if you can do that, then you can save Fortifying Brew for the sort of the second round of attacks. We'll talk about in a second. And your survival will go way up. But for me, I was not able to survive the start of the Berserk very reliably if I just relied on Elusive Brew. It's just way too much randomness. And even with both of those going, you can still see that the spike damage is ridiculous. So once you pop both your cooldowns and interrupt the storm, if there is one during Berserk, then you want to just focus on doing DPS without wasting energy on anything except heals if you can. Or I should say heals and Keg Smash. So you're just going to find that the amount of damage that's dealt to you is excessive. And it's, pretty frequent that you'll be hit for around 200,000 in melee hits, a little over actually. So these hits obviously have to be mitigated. That means using Chi to reduce the stagger damage, get rid of it very frequently. And then the energy has to be spent almost primarily on heals. This means that you can't just rely on Expel Harm, because if you're low enough health to have a instant refresh of your Expel Harm cooldown, it pretty much means one more hit is probably going to kill you. So you just cannot rely on that. This means that often you're going to actually want to drop healing spheres under yourself as your secondary or even primary heal method. Beyond that, you also want to sidestep a lot to pick up the orbs that may be on the ground randomly around you. And then beyond that, make sure you keep your Zen Sphere active. You don't want to cast Zen Sphere early because the explosive heal and damage, of course, will be quite significant with this Vengeance level. And also it wastes a global, as often as you do it, of course, that's an extra global you could be spending somewhere else. So more often than not, when you're practicing this, you're going to die because you're simply global locked. You're trying to do one thing and you get hit a couple times during that and you just fall over dead before you can react with a heal or whatever, even if you had the resources to do it. So that's why you want to really focus on saving your heals or your energy for those heals and less on the DPS. Now, not to completely counter the point I just made, but you do want to focus DPS when Maloriak is not directly attacking you. So there will be periods where he's doing a transition into a blue or a red Vial phase, or when he's transitioning into the final phase where he summons the final minions here. And at both those situations, he's not attacking at the time. He's looking at his cauldron, or he's just standing still drinking the final vial to trigger the last guardians. In either of those situations, you know you're safe from damage at the time, so you really want to focus on DPS during that period. That's where you're going to take full advantage of all that vengeance that you built up in the prior moments of this Berserk. So here as it starts over, I actually don't activate my cooldowns right away, and I get a hit initially. And this is really dangerous because you have the green debuff still that carries over when the green phase occurs. And this is the slime that increases damage taken by 100%. So when Berserk begins, you will have this slime debuff on you for a couple seconds beyond that Berserk. That means those initial hits are going to be 500, 600,000. And even when you're mitigating half that through shuffle, it's still a ridiculous amount of damage. So it is often advisable to either start out with Dampen Harm in addition to your other cooldowns, or just make sure you have Elusive Brew and Fortifying Brew active when those first hits come out. And then be really quick on the trigger to either heal yourself or even throw up your guard if you have one available after you get low health. Because as I said, once you get a couple hits on your vengeance, is going to skyrocket, and that guard will absorb a ton of damage. So that'll buy you a few seconds to heal up again for the next volley of attacks, so to speak. So when Berserk begins, you actually have to prevent yourself from dying for about 33 seconds or so before the next Vial phase actually starts. So ideally, you want to be able to push Maloriak down to around 30% health or lower before this occurs without getting him too low. And again, I'll talk about that in a moment. But obviously your primary cooldowns like Fortifying Brew or Elusive Brew last 20 and 15 seconds respectively. So even though you should be able to immediately recast Elusive Brew when the 15-second initial duration runs out, it's still not very much time compared to a 33-second phase before the next Vial phase. So you're going to have a situation after your cooldowns run out where you're just getting clobbered and you're just praying that you don't get RNG'd and die. And again, that's why hundreds of attempts it took to get this down. So that said, once you do push him long enough to trigger that next Vial phase, this has the advantage of putting him far away from the final ad spawn location near the cauldron there. And this will allow you to not only DPS during that time while he's throwing the cauldron in and doing his stuff with that, but then when you push him below 25% and he summons the final set of ads, he will already be far away from them. And this will buy you some more DPS time before the ads get in range. Because just like the aberrations early on in the fight, the final two ads also apply the 20% damage reduction to Maloriak, but also increases damage by 20%. And so when there are two of them near him, obviously 40% more damage on top of the crazy amount he's doing from Berserk is insane. So by the time those ads spawn, you should be looking to have Maloriak dead very shortly. If not, you're just going to die because he'll start doing crazy stuff to you. So you can see here that Maloriak's around 30%, which is about where he should be ideally to throw in the Vial for the next phase. And this allows me time to get in position and start DPSing him while he's going through that transition period. So as soon as he runs over to do that first Vial, I pop my potion and my tiger pet and start burning him with all the DPS I can. If you do it properly, you can push him below 25% and then force him to enter his final phase, phase 2, right away, because this actually triggers at 25%. So pushing him beyond that threshold while he's doing the animation for the previous Vial, which you see is what I'm doing here, will give you a little bit of extra time, and it all makes a huge difference here. So once you push beyond 25 and the prime subjects start to come out, you have very little time left before you're going to die. There's just no two ways about it. The reason for this is that there are a lot of extra abilities that are used, and Maloriak's going to do more damage. So the major ability that will really hurt you here is the buffs that Maloriak gets from being near the mobs, just like the previous aberrations, are going to increase his damage by 20%. So 40% total. In addition to that, and all his melee damage going up, he casts Magma Jet, which you can just sidestep, which you see right there. But more importantly, he'll also cast Acid Nova. And this will do around 100,000 damage to you every second for 10 seconds. So it's just completely unavoidable damage. And again, you have to deal with that, plus, the crazy damage from Maloriak that's amplified from the Prime Subject buffs as well. So this final section is all about just DPSing him down before he hopefully kills you. You still want to, heal yourself when you can, and buy yourself whatever time you can, but ultimately you're trying to burn him down before the ads get too close or get a chance to, really buff him up for very long. All right, so if you stuck with it this long, I appreciate it. This is just going to be the walkthrough, basically, of this fight. So I'm just going to commentate on exactly what I'm doing here. And this is, again, 243rd attempt, so I'm pretty proficient at this stuff. So when I pull, I get just outside the half circle area that he's standing on, pop my potion and roll inside. Immediately, Tiger Palm to get the armor reduction buff. Use a jab to get or Cake Smash and a jab to get my energy low. Pop my Tiger right away for extra DPS. And then it's just basically a DPS rotation as the general phases transition. So keeping my energy and my chi low. You'll want to use your Zen Sphere every 15 seconds because it will do more total damage than one global cooldown spent on Tiger Palm in that same period. So whenever there's a choice, use Zen Sphere instead of Tiger Palm. Same thing goes for something like Expel Harm. If you have, say, 100,000 health deficit or more, Expel Harm is more damage for the energy cost than jab is. So always use that over jab if that's the choice. And these are the little kind of things that you need to really focus on to do enough damage in this fight. So here we have Red Vial phase. So I used guard for that first Scorching Blast that I talked about early on in that part. And then I'm making sure to spend my chi so it's low when the aberrations come in. There the timing lined up for Cake Smash really well. So Cake Smash, do a Breath of Fire on them to get the dot going, and then don't worry about it. I also use Fortifying Brew during this Red Vial phase because my health was pretty low and I didn't want to die. And I know that it will be up again when I need it for Berserk. So often you'll want to use that for one of the Red Vial phases that's occurring during the ads because you'll take a lot more damage there. Whereas the later ones, when it's just Maloriak, it's not so bad. So here we've got the green phase. One of the things you really want to focus on to help your DPS is to take full advantage of the slime debuff period after a green phase begins. So for those, I think it's 15 seconds. Yeah, 15 seconds for debilitating slime. You want to do as much DPS to Maloriak as possible. So this means save up chi, save up energy without capping out on either. Same thing for your Cake Smash. You don't want to save the cooldown for it. But if green phase has just happened and you have 4 or 5 chi and nearly full energy, you can really lay into Maloriak quite a bit. And you should usually get 2 Cake Smashes along with maybe 4 or 5 Blackout Kicks in addition to random, jabs and Tiger Palms in there and whatnot. And because it's amplified by 100% during that 15-second period, it's a lot of extra damage. So take full advantage of that. So here we're in the second round, doing the blue phase, so I can see that Flash Freeze is coming up soon. So I look for that Arcane Storm, and there it is, which, as I said before, is usually the case. So when that's about over, I make sure my Zen Sphere is up. And now Flash Freeze hits me. 2 ticks for my Zen Sphere, kills it. And around that time, we're transitioning to the next phase. So here's the red phase again. So I immediately, or not immediately, but almost immediately dampen harm. So there's dampen harm. And I know this will be active on me for the rest of the phase so that I'm completely covered. So halfway through that arcane storm, I know that the blast is coming up shortly after that. So I use my guard to absorb most of that damage. And then we got another arcane storm. We'll have consuming flames, but can't really afford to interrupt that because I don't want to trigger an extra blast during this phase. That would be much worse than the arcane storm damage. So here my health gets pretty low, but we're transitioning, and I would have had guard available shortly after, so it was a fine situation. One thing you have to keep in mind is that, again, because of DPS requirements, you actually want to take as much damage as possible throughout the fight without dying, so that your vengeance is as maxed as it can get. So this means that whenever possible, try not to mitigate something. If you can afford not to use elusive brew throughout the entire fight, which is pretty much the case for me, then don't, because you just want to take a little bit extra damage in most cases and therefore do a little bit more damage. So there we had the green phase. I was just trying to DPS them as much as possible during that slime period, taking full advantage of everything that I have that does extra damage. So Cake Smash first, and then Blackout Kick, and then Expel Harm, and then Zen Sphere, and then finally Jab, Tiger Palm, all that stuff. So here we're in the final round of Vial phases, and obviously you have a 50-50 chance in this final round to get either blue or red the first one. So if you get red first, this is generally a better situation. It doesn't mean that you cannot succeed if you have red second, but it just happens to be easier because you'll generally take quite a bit of damage at the end of the red vial phase, and this damage has to be healed so that you're near full health when you enter the Berserk, otherwise you'll just die right away. So if red vial phase is the last phase before Berserk, or before the green one rather, then that's going to be tricky to heal up the damage. Whereas if blue phase is the one prior, you generally won't take very much damage from it. So another thing I try to do is watch that Berserk timer when it's getting low, and when I have a little bit over 30 seconds remaining, I'll throw up a guard on myself. And this just adds extra absorption to sort of ensure that I don't have any problems, mitigating damage leading up to that Berserk start. So if it's needed, I'll throw up that guard, and that's especially useful in the red phase if this is the final one. For the blue one, it's not all that important because you can heal up this damage pretty easily. So there I'm only down a couple 100,000. And you'll generally want to throw out some healing spheres under yourself. So there I'm doing that just to get your health high. And don't be afraid to DPS if you have full health and your energy level's good. So here I throw up both my cooldowns right away. You can see I hit 600,000 stagger damage. So it's just an insane amount. Luckily I'm starting to do some avoidance stuff here to get my health back up. And my elusive brew's down, so I pop it again, another 6 seconds of it. Interrupt storms. And I'm just tiger palming as much as possible while using healing spheres to heal myself. And here's another huge series of hits. Barely survive, heal myself back up. And I had guard off cooldown, so I couldn't save myself with that, but now it's available again. So this transition's looking really good. I pop my cooldowns, and I push him from the blue phase into the final phase. So he doesn't actually start attacking me until he's at 12%. And then I just have to hopefully pray that I can survive long enough. And I do so, but just barely. So there I go, and there he goes. Yeah. So, this is a long guide, I know, but it's a crazy fight and very difficult. So thanks so much for watching. That is Maloriak's solo monk guide for 10-man normal. And good luck.